it's not all doom and gloom. There are some opportunities to get ahead if you can make the right moves. The other thing that is interesting is we do see a fair amount of cranes in the air right now. That means that things are getting built. However, the starts for the buildings afterwards have all been at a slow. Hello everyone and welcome to the show. Today we're going to be covering some of the stats from November and taking a look at what to do with them, as well as some of the driving factors. We'll also be taking a look at some of the questions that were sent in from one of our listeners. So without further ado, let's get into it. This has been a bit of a decrease that has happened in November. We had a quick bump up in October, and now that has been completely washed away as it is down $59 on average for the greater Vancouver area. So that is a fairly substantial drop. This is actually the lowest that it has been all year. So that is a substantial drop, as well as the fact that year over year for November, the rates are down $195 on average for rentals in greater Vancouver. So needless to say, the market is quite slow. If you're a tenant, this is a great time to go find a place. And if you're a landlord, you are going to have to weather the storm, as typically it does slow down in December, and most likely that will continue on. So basically, buckle up and try to withstand the hold that we're going to have for the end of the year, most likely. Obviously, I don't have a crystal ball, but take a look at that, and it's definitely something to be aware of. So make sure that you weather the storm properly. Now, there are some driving factors for this. Obviously, it will not be permanent. There are 5 major driving factors. The first one, of course, is what's going on down south. Our friends down south are causing quite a bit of economic uncertainty, which is starting to wash over up here and into the secondary markets. Now, what I mean with that in the secondary markets is essentially not just point blank the first person to get hit with it. An example would be developers. Now, the developers are obviously all holding back and slowing down because they don't know how much the materials to build the homes are going to cost. So that is causing them to slow down. And in turn, it's causing a slowdown with everybody else, such as all of the plumbers, electricians, carpenters, and so on and so forth, that normally would be at work building what the developer has developed. So this is starting to wash over. And then, of course, that will go down the line because it's going to cause uncertainty. So people will tighten up their wallets and not go out and spend as much. So again, this will end up hitting all of the service industry, the coffee shops, all of this sort of things. It all will sort of spread out together. That is causing a lot of tenants basically to just stay put, and they're not moving because they don't know if they're going to have a job the next day. So basically they're sticking with what they're knowing and just staying where they are. Additionally, of course, as I mentioned at the top of the show, it typically slows down in the winter months. We're coming into the end of November and the start of December. Most people are starting to think about Christmas, holidays, this sort of thing, and not packing up all their belongings and moving to a new home. So that is one of the 5 factors. Also, Canada has tightened up their immigration. So with less people coming here, there's just simply not enough people out searching for places. And this is basically causing supply and demand to be a factor. And therefore, there's a lot of places for tenants to select from, which is, again, pushing down prices of rental homes. A third factor also ties in with the immigration is that Canada has tightened up its rules and how many student visas that it is releasing. Some reports are reporting that at the start of 2024, the approval rate for all of the student visas was at 50%. Flip side of that, of 2025, the approval rate is down to 30%. So this is causing less students international to come to Vancouver and thus having an impact on the rentals. This is especially large in the areas where there's higher education, such as SFU, UBC, the Surrey campuses, and so on and so forth, because that usually is a hotbed for students coming in. However, right now it is not, because they're simply not here. Local students generally will just stay where they are and commute to school, whereas the international students, generally, they're coming here specifically for school, well, at the start at least, and they want to be near where they're going to school. So all of the areas around the higher education are getting hit harder. We'll take a look at that a little bit later in the show with a bit of a graph and one of the studies from Rentals.ca. But needless to say, that is one of the major effects, 3 out of the 5 issues that we're currently having. The fourth one is that a lot of the purpose-built rentals have been finished, and so now they're open for business, along with a lot of the new builds. So with this, again, supply and demand come into effect, because suddenly there's a whole bunch of places for tenants to choose from. A lot of the purpose-built rentals are starting to offer various discounts, free parking. They're starting to offer a couple months free for the first year or what have you. And then, of course, it'll move up to their generally higher prices than the mom and pops owners. But there is a battle right now to get the tenants into the place. So it's almost a bit of a race to the bottom, which is why I'd said at the top of the show that for tenants listening, this is a good time for you to upgrade and maybe check out some places, because you might be able to get yourself a pretty good deal. And then the fifth element of what is driving rent prices down, obviously there's more than just 5, but these are the 5 main. The fifth is that the market is on the sales side is slow. This has been a very strange time in that both rentals and sales have both been on a downward trajectory. This is unusual simply because they usually work opposite one another. So if the sales market is busy, the rental market is slow. If the rental market is busy, the sales market is slow. But in this current climate that we're in, everything seems to be going down. Even with the mortgage rates going down, it's been unusual, because generally when the mortgage rates go down, sales pick up. But we saw a small blip, but generally nothing else came out. We talked a couple months ago about whether the mortgage reduction would cause some more action in the sales market. It was a short-lived blip, and then everything just fizzled out again. It seems to have almost changed from how higher the rate's going to go to now how lower the rate's going to go, and people are still yet again stuck on the sidelines. So because of the sales side not being so busy, it's causing less displacement of tenants. Therefore, everyone is just kind of staying put and not moving. So simply put, what it's causing is these 5 factors are slowing down the rental market and the sales market as well. And basically, everyone is staying put until they have a better idea of what's going on with the economic uncertainty and basically life in general. It also is typical that it slows down in the winter months. So all of these factors combined usually makes for a slow market, and that's where we currently are. Now, as I said that the sales market is slow and the builders have slowed up, this is making more a buyer's market. So it is a good time to go and possibly go search for an investment, because right now you probably can get yourself a pretty good deal. And if you can weather the storm, which you should have some money behind you to make sure that you can hold up in case you have a vacancy or a low rent perhaps. But when things do finally turn around, which they will, then you'll be able to take advantage of this and collect a higher rent later for a property that you bought on the lower end of the scale. So it's not all doom and gloom. There are some opportunities to get ahead if you can make the right moves. The other thing that is interesting is we do see a fair amount of cranes in the air right now. That means that things are getting built. However, the starts for the buildings afterwards have all been at a slow. So probably, I would suspect within the next 2 years or so, we will likely see not many new starts happening. Or if they are, they're just beginning, which means they're going to be another 2 years out. So we're probably going to have a lull, in which case the amount of product that we have is all that we have. This will cause prices of both rents and sales to likely rise. So we will definitely see some improvement. And on top of that, with the immigration part, it's not sustainable. We need to have more people come to Canada simply for the fact that we're not making the babies. So if we run out of population, then we'll have major issues in that. So I would suspect that the immigration rules are likely going to loosen up at some point in time in the relatively near future. And then we will end up with more people coming, rents will increase, and basically the sales market will also increase, and everything will go back to status quo of very expensive Vancouver. So I had spoken before about the study from Rentals.ca. It showed that the education areas are getting hit harder with the downward pressure of prices due to the vacancies than the adjoining city. An example from this study is that in 2024 April to 2025 April, Vancouver had a 3.9% down in price. That same time at UBC was down 8.2% in price. So this is something that you can see across the country around most of the higher education places, is that the ones that have student housing more primarily are generally getting hit harder than the ones that are just the regular city. So do keep that in mind. It's kind of an interesting way that it's switched around, because generally speaking, when there's a higher student population coming, that makes for a larger rental pool, which is usually a safer bet for your investment. However, with this policy change, it has kind of changed that program. So if you're looking for an investment, do look around still for ones near higher education, but maybe give a little bit more weight to transit, such as close to SkyTrain or the bus loops, because obviously with the less international students coming, it has shown that it's harder to rent near school, especially for places like UBC, which is kind of an island. If you're out at UBC, you're a pretty good distance away from the rest of everything that people are looking for in Vancouver. So the bottom line is that rents are slow. We will be able to fix this later on. It will pick up in the relatively near future, as long as you can weather the storm. If you currently have tenants, as per usual, make sure you take care of them, and do make sure that you look before you go raising the rents, because you may end up driving your tenant out. And as we said at the top of the show, it's almost $200 cheaper on average for Greater Vancouver for the rents. There's probably some deals out there. So if you raise the rent on your tenant, they may leave, go find a cheaper place, and then you're going to be vacant, as well as trying to rent at a lower price than you had previously. So sometimes one in the hand is worth more than two in the bush. So we had a question, two questions actually, one sent from Sandra, and she said, how often should I inspect my property, and should I consider hiring a property management company? Well, of course you should hire property management. No, that's obviously a little bit biased on my part, but this is a double-barreled question, and one that we do get asked fairly often. So as far as how often you should inspect the property, we would always suggest at least every 6 months. Also make sure that you take a look at your insurance, because they usually have a certain amount of times that they want you to visit the property. Some of them are as short as 3 months, which is a little insane, and will probably annoy your tenant quite a bit. So when looking at insurance, make sure you check that part of the policy, because you don't want them to get out of paying out if something goes wrong due to you not checking the property at the intervals that they've dictated. So every 6 months is a good starting point. Legally, of course, you can come in every month if you want, but that, of course, would drive your tenant completely nuts and probably make for a not smooth tenancy. That being said, if when you're doing your inspections, you see something that is maybe causing you a little bit of problem, such as if you're noticing an above average amount of clutter. I mean, obviously people are living there. We all have clutter in our house. But if you're noticing it's above average, lots of dirt, food in particular, because that can attract mice and other rodents and such. So if there's something that's causing you a little bit of an alarm, make sure that you come back and check to see if it's causing a trend for this. One of the things that's not talked about very often and does come up is hoarding. And because that's a mental issue that can be triggered by all sorts of things, death in the family, breakup, depression, whatever it may be, it can get ahead of you. But you can stop hoarding if you catch it ahead of time. So if you come in the first time and it's very dirty, second time it's more dirty, third time it's even more, you can ask the tenant and explain to them, we need you to tidy this up. We're going to come back and check that it's been done, because it's going to start attracting infestation and issues, and it will end up damaging the property. So it is an uncomfortable conversation to have, but it will protect your investment. And that way you'll be able to stop the hoarding ahead of time. So that is to cover how often you should inspect the property. Now, that being said, coming to the double-barreled question of, should I hire a property management company? Anybody can manage their own property, but there's certain things that you have to take into consideration when you're debating whether to hire a property management company. One of them, of course, being time. You're working a full-time job, most likely since you own 2 places, and you probably don't want to have another job which is coming to take care of the tenants' issues such as repairs, doing your checks, chasing them down if rent's not paid, things like this. So if you have the time or the time management to do that, or energy, then by all means, do consider managing it yourself. Other things that you need to take into consideration are just your own personality. Are you a little bit hot under the collar? Are you prone to getting into yelling matches and conflicts? Maybe you want to consider using a property manager because of that. Or do you not have time, again, to keep track of the laws that are changing? Since when the laws are changed for rental, there's not a lot of fanfare about it, and you basically just need to keep on top of that. That being said, of course, you can just stop at the website and take a look every couple months just to make sure that you're up to date. But these are some of the things that you want to take into consideration, as well as, do you have the capacity to step away from what's being said? Because I do understand that you have your place and you probably lived in it for a while and took care of it, and you chose the color of that wall. And if you have a tenant come in and say, oh, this is the most disgusting place I've ever seen, can you separate yourself from that and not take it personally? Because all of these things are aspects of being in property management. So do take into account, you are able to definitely manage the property yourself, but do you have the time? Do you have the mental capacity? Do you have the patience to do that? If the answer is no to any of these, you may want to consider hiring a property manager, simply for the fact that if you don't have these abilities, you may end up in a very tough situation with an angry tenant, a stressful situation, and overall just unhappiness. So I hope that answered your question, Sandra. And if you guys have any questions that you want answered, just feel free to email us. The information is in the description below. That's been your November update. My name is Hayes. This has been Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast.